The station master slid the logbook across the counter without looking up. Eliza set her satchel down, uncapped the pen, and found her name already there. Eliza Catherine Harrow. Ridgeline Station. Arriving dusk, 14th October. The ink was 6 weeks old. The handwriting was her father's. She had watched her father die in March. She capped the pen without signing, put it back exactly where she'd found it. The station master was still reading his paper glasses, pushed to the end of his nose, unaware of anything at all. Somewhere behind her, a man was sweeping the porch, slow, steady strokes, always the same section of boards, not looking up. She said carefully, "Who else has seen this entry?" The station master finally looked up. He was a spare man, gray at the temples, with the expression of someone who had worked a long counter for a long time and learned not to be surprised. "Funny thing," he said. He folded the paper. "Man who wrote it said you'd ask that exact question." She didn't run. Running was the wrong answer here, and she already knew it. She had walked the last 6 miles. The horse had gone lame at a creek crossing 3 hours before dark, and she'd unsaddled it and left it in a stand of cottonwoods with enough water to keep it through the night, and continued on foot because the only alternative was to stop in open country with 1 canteen and a satchel full of things she couldn't afford to lose. Her left shoulder would need 2 or 3 days. Her boots had been wet since Tuesday. She had dealt with all of that the way you deal with things that can't be fixed immediately. She had not stopped thinking about the logbook entry. She picked up the satchel, cracked leather brass clasps worn to bare metal, her father's initials pressed into the flap and almost gone, and sat down at the nearest table, set it across her knees. Chose the chair with sight lines to the door, the window, and the man with the broom. Ridgeline Station was a low building of pine and river stone at the junction of 2 freight roads. 3 lanterns in iron brackets, 1 long counter with a row of mail slots behind it. A staircase at the back that creaked on the 2nd step. She confirmed this when she heard Holt's boy go up. Later. A cook's smell from somewhere past the back wall, something boiled too long. 2 horses at the hitching rail. A freight wagon with a broken tongue propped against the east wall. She had catalogued all of it in the time it took to walk from the door to the counter, the way her father had taught her. You don't understand a place until you know how you'd leave it quickly. And you don't understand a person until you know what they're trying not to show you. She understood this place. She did not yet understand the logbook entry. 6 weeks ago, she had been 3 days outside of Cheyenne, moving north in a supply wagon with 4 other people she had known for less than a week. 6 weeks ago, her father had been dead for 2 months, killed somewhere on the road south of the Powder River. That was what the wagon master had told her, and she'd had no reason to doubt him. She had said words over a patch of high grass outside Cheyenne in the late afternoon light, and the words had been real and the loss had been real. 6 weeks ago, whoever had written her name in this logbook had known she was coming here before she had. She looked at the man sweeping. His back was to her, broad across the shoulders, unhurried. The broom moved in the same short strokes it had been moving when she came through the door, working a section of porch that was already clean. He hadn't looked up when she crossed the yard. He hadn't looked up when she spoke to the station master. He was sweeping a clean floor, and he had been doing it for long enough that anyone watching closely would understand. It was not about the floor. The cook came out from the back and set a bowl of something on her table without ceremony. "You'll want to eat," she said. "Thank you." The cook went back. Eliza ate slowly and thought about her father's handwriting, the backward lean of his letters, the habit he had of pressing harder on every downstroke, which meant his writing wore through the back of the paper. If you let him use anything under 12-pound stock. She had learned to write by copying his hand exactly age 7 through 11, which he had considered a practical exercise in precision. She was absolutely certain it was his hand. This was not sentiment. This was 10 years of close observation. She put the empty bowl aside and set her hands on top of the satchel. Her name, her father's hand, 6 weeks old. A station master who knew the question she'd ask. A man who swept a clean section of porch and had not once looked at her. She decided to sleep with the satchel under her arm. Outside the frontier came up dark on all sides, and Ridgeline Station held its small warmth against it, not by pushing back, only by staying lit. By the 2nd morning, she had the measure of the station's people. Holt ran it with his wife, a quiet woman named Ruth, who handled the cook and the accounts and the record of every rider who'd come. threw in 4 years, which she kept in a second ledger, she did not keep on the public counter. The widow Carver occupied the East Room and knew things before they happened, which Eliza attributed to the practice of watching carefully and drawing conclusions. The Aldridge brothers, Thomas and Carl, both thick across the shoulders, both economical with language, worked the farrier operation on the east side of the property. They had not spoken directly to each other in 18 months. From what Eliza pieced together, the source of the dispute was a fence line between their adjacent pastures. Neither was willing to pay for a fresh survey. She borrowed Thomas Aldridge's measuring chain on the third afternoon without explaining why. She walked the fence line twice. The original stakes were driven deep, the kind set by someone who intended them to last. She could trust them. She set up her father's transit at the northeast corner and took her readings and did the arithmetic twice. The fence was 11 feet and 8 inches east of where it should be. She moved the stakes herself, reset the corner marker, restrung the line. 2 hours. The sun moved a full hand's width while she worked, and nobody came to help, and she did not need help. The brothers stood on opposite sides of the new line and looked at it. Carl said, "That's right then." Thomas crouched and looked at the depth of the new marker. Stood. 18 months, he said to no one. Neither of them looked at each other. But they were standing on the same side of the new line. No one made a formal acknowledgement. The widow Carver left a plate of cornbread on her table that evening without speaking. Holt recalibrated something in the way he looked at her. Ruth asked if she'd be wanting to stay on a few more days, in a way that suggested the answer wouldn't be unwelcome. She was cleaning the transit by lamplight when she looked toward the stable. He was standing in the doorway, not moving, just standing in the dark of the stable entrance, with the yard between them watching her work. She couldn't see his face from this distance, only the shape of him, the hat, the shoulders, and the fact that he was still. He had been there before she looked. She kept working. The brass needed the lens cloth on the eyepiece first, then the barrel, then the objective lens, her father's order, the only order that didn't leave smears. He crossed the yard and stopped at the edge of the lamp circle with his hat in his hand. He said, "Your father taught you that method." She set the cloth down. "The sequence," he said. "Eyepiece, body lens." He said it was the only order that didn't leave smears on the objective, and she looked up. The scar along his jaw ran from below his left ear to the corner of his mouth, the tissue silver white and smooth, the kind of healing that had taken a long time and hadn't been helped along by anything. He looked at her steadily and without apology. She said, "How do you know my father's method?" "Cannot a question exactly." "Your father and I worked together for 4 years, he said. She waited. He didn't elaborate. He put his hat back on and nodded once, as if something had been settled, and went back to the stable. She sat with the transit in her hands for a long time after that. She cleaned the lens last the way she'd been taught, and the image through the eyepiece came up clean and sharp, the gatepost, the road beyond it running east into dark. She found it by accident, which was probably the point. 5 days in cleaning the satchel after a morning survey, a rivet on the base came loose under her thumb. Not broken, just turned a quarter rotation, and when she turned it back, the bottom shifted against her palm. She pressed it. The false bottom opened on a brass hinge no wider than her finger, inside a space about 2 inches deep, running the full width of the bag. A second copy of the survey rolled tight and tied with waxed cord, and beneath it, flat against the hinge, an envelope. Her father's handwriting on the outside. Her name. No date. She read the outside 3 times. The envelope was not sealed. She opened it with the door latched, and read it once fast and once slow, and a third time, word by word. 2 pages, both sides, the script smaller than his usual hand, but unmistakably his, the backward lean, the downstrokes, the lowercase a with the small hook at the top. That was a habit she had pointed out to him when she was 9, and that he had never corrected. He was alive. He had been alive when he wrote this. The letter spoke of a hidden valley, 2 days' ride, northeast of a man at the station, who would know the way, of something she was carrying that she hadn't known she was carrying until this moment. He had written, "I should have told you sooner than this. I am sorry for the method of delivery, but I needed you to arrive first and find your own footing. You are better at that than you know." She put the letter face down on the bed. She had said words over a patch of high grass outside Cheyenne. She had let the grief be real and hadn't pushed it away. The grief had been honest. It was not undone now. It was just also incorrect, which was a strange thing to hold the sense that she had paid a debt that turned out not to be owed, and that the paying had been real, even if the debt wasn't. Both things were true at once. She picked the letter up again. He had written it before she arrived. The references to Ridgeline, to the man at the station, to the survey in the hidden compartment, all present tense anticipatory. He had mapped the endpoint. He had laid in the letter the way you lay in a survey stake, deep intended to last. The survey was still in her hands. She unrolled it carefully. Her father's notation marks ran along every margin his private system of shorthand angles and directional codes, the one it had taken her years to learn. He had told her once that he'd shared it with only 2 people in his life, and one of them was her. The second person was at Ridgeline Station. She was now certain of this. She unrolled the survey fully and held the lamp close and looked at it the way she would look at any unknown terrain systematically from established points outward. The section headers each referenced a territorial charter provision, specific numbered clauses she had seen in filing documents before. Charter Provision 7.4b. The Authorship Clause. She found it. A survey filed under a registered surveyor's original name, with demonstrable authorship notation matching the original field record, took legal precedence over any competing application provided. The original survey was filed within the statutory window from the date of first arrival at a designated territorial station. Her name was in the logbook. She had arrived at a designated territorial station. The statutory window was running. Her father had not just left her evidence. He had left her a legal mechanism. She sat up straighter. She sat with the lamp burning low, and the survey open, and the letter beside it, and understood slowly that she had been carrying something much heavier than leather and brass clasps across 140 miles of bad country. She did not sleep. She came downstairs before the cook had the fire going. Jonah was already at her table. He had a lock tool in his right hand, slim, made from a bent nail file, the tip shaped for pin tumbler work, and he set it on the table when she sat down across from him. Didn't hide it. Did not open with an explanation. Just set it on the wood between them and waited. She looked at the tool. Then she looked at him. He said Vane's document box. She waited. He's been intercepting territorial registrar communications. Not all of them, just the ones relevant to pending survey registrations in the Northern Territory. Official mail routed through him or held by his people at the relay stations. Notices to surveyors about open filing windows. Confirmation receipts. Correction requests. He delays them or they simply don't arrive. By the time a surveyor realizes what's happened, the window has closed and the land has gone to a competing application. He paused. He has done this to 4 separate families in the last 2 years. In each case, the land transferred to a holding company within 6 months of the window's expiration. She said, "You went into his room?" "Yes." "Without asking me?" "Yes." The station was cold. The sky through the east window was going from black to a color that was not quite anything yet. She looked at the lock tool. It had opened a man's private correspondence in the room directly above their heads, and whatever that said about Jonah, it had also produced information she needed. She was furious about this. She was also sitting across from the only person who could have gotten it. "The registration window," she said. "How does that affect the survey?" "Territorial law. A completed survey can be registered under the original surveyor's name within a fixed period of arrival, a designated station. Your father's northern survey has never been registered. The holding company Vane operates through has a competing application, but it can't advance while the Harrow survey remains in pending status." He kept his hands flat on the table. "There's a registration calendar in Holt's filing drawer, 3rd shelf." She got up and found the drawer and found the calendar and came back. He said, "The window closes in 11 days. Vane knows that." The document box also held correspondence confirming he's been tracking the survey's location. "He knows I have it." "He knows a Harrow arrived at Ridgeline with the satchel." "Yes." 11 days. She thought about what it would mean to lose the survey to an estate verification freeze, not to violence, not to fire or flood, but to the patient mechanical operation of a system built specifically to produce that outcome. 4 families, 6 months each. She was looking at the shape of something that had been running for a long time, without any of its targets, understanding what they were looking at. Jonah said, You would have told me to wait." "Yes," she said. "I know." He stood. At the foot of the stairs, he stopped. His messenger service is faster than the standard post. If Vane sends word to the registrar before the survey arrives, they'll flag it pending estate verification. That process can take months. "What do you need to get the survey to the registrar?" "The survey. A filing authorization signed by a harrow, a fast horse, and the better road." He went upstairs. She sat in the cold room with the calendar on the table and counted days. Now it was past midnight when she'd stopped working. The station began to wake around her, indifferent to what she was calculating. She went and got the survey and sat with it until the cook came in for the fire. Vane arrived on the afternoon stage 4 days before the confrontation, which gave her 4 days to watch him. She used all of them. He was perhaps 50 well kept, with a quality she identified in the first hour as professional patience, the kind that looks like friendliness but runs deeper and colder. He came off the stage into the yard and stood for a moment with his hands loose at his sides, and she saw him rid the station in a single, slow look, the way she read every place exits people, objects that didn't belong. He saw the widow carver's fence post listing east. He walked to it without announcing his intention and reset it with his hands packing the base, standing back to check the plumb before continuing to the counter. He checked in with Holt. He knew everyone's name by supper. At the meal, he sat near the middle of the table, the position that let him hear every conversation at once, and he was warm and present and unhurried, and she could find nothing specific to push against, which was itself the thing she kept coming back to. He asked Carl about the farrier work with the specificity of a man who had known Smiths. He asked Thomas about the North Pasture grade with genuine interest. Thomas, who had not said a voluntary word to a stranger in the 5 days Eliza had been here, answered him. On the second day, she found the pattern in how he moved around the station. He was always where the information was. At the mail counter when Holt sorted the post. At the freight register when the afternoon stage came through. At the station master's table during the evening meal when the conversation turned to local conditions land. Roads water, which relay stations had changed hands. He gathered information the way some men gather firewood steadily, without appearing to be doing it, stacking it against future need. She noted this. She also noted that he was genuinely useful wherever he went. The community was getting something real from Aldous Vane, and that made the gathering harder to see for what it was. He knew her father. He brought it up during a pause in the meal, addressing her directly, with a courtesy that did not feel performed. He had known Elias Harrow for 12 years, he said. He had commissioned several survey consultations. He spoke about her father with something that was either genuine regard or an extraordinarily practiced imitation of it. He had an extraordinary eye, Vane said, and a mind for the law as it applied to territorial land, which is rarer than you'd think. He smiled, small, reflective. "I was sorry to hear of his passing." She said, "How did you hear?" "Death certificates are public record in this territory," he said simply. "I happened to see the notice." He passed the bread to Thomas Aldridge and moved the conversation elsewhere. That night she watched his luggage go up 2 cases and a document box, reinforced corners and a center lock, not heavy. Documents never are. She thought about what it meant to track the death of a survey consultant, to look for that specific record, in the specific territory where that consultant had done his most significant recent work, at the specific time when a registration window was approaching. Most people didn't track the deaths of surveyors unless they had a specific reason to need them dead. She filed that next to everything else she was keeping. 2 days before the confrontation, she watched Jonah, watching Vane from the stable doorway, standing in the shadow of the frame, tracking him across the yard. She watched Jonah watch Vane and thought about patience and what it looked like from different sides of it. That night, checking the transit before bed, she found something she had missed, pressed into the leather of the satchel's inner lining, so faint it needed lamplight at the right angle. A series of the same notation marks that ran along the survey's margins, 4 of them. Her father's authorship code stamped directly into the bag itself. Not to record anything, to identify it. To prove, if it ever came to that this specific satchel had left his specific hands. He had planned for the bag to be found. He had planned for the bag to be evidence. She put the lamp out and sat in the dark for a while. She found him in the stable after the station went quiet. He was checking the shoe on a bay mare, crouched with the hoof between his knees, running his thumb along the nail line. He didn't look up when she came in. She said, "You posted the reward notice." He set the hoof down and straightened. He told her without decoration, 7 years ago, he had been riding south of Santa Fe with a sealed survey tube and 2 days of water left when the second day ran out. Her father had found him on a salt flat at midday and given him half of what he had left without asking who he was or what he was carrying. After that, they had worked together, her father surveying the northern territories, Jonah riding the finished surveys to the territorial registrar offices ahead of the land brokers who paid relay riders to intercept and delay official filings. He had known it was illegal work on the other side. He had told himself the right work justified it. Until they caught him. He said that plainly the way you state a fact about weather. They had caught him at a relay station outside of Lander in the autumn of the year before last, and spent 3 months persuading themselves he was no longer useful. The scar along his jaw was from the persuading. He had not told them anything about the Northern Survey or her father's location. Not heroism. He was clear about that. It was calculation. The survey and the location were the only things keeping him alive, and he had held on to them accordingly. When he got out, her father was already in hiding. The Northern Survey, the final complete one, covering 7 sections of prime northern land that Vane's holding company had been positioning to claim, had been in the hidden compartment of the satchel for 11 months. Her father had sent it ahead before the hiding began, addressed to his daughter, care of a post station in Cheyenne that no longer existed by the time it should have arrived. When word came through that Eliza had been taken at Dry Creek Basin and auctioned, Jonah had posted the reward notice. He had written it in her father's style because her father had taught him to write, and it was the only language they had left for communicating at a distance. He stopped. She said, "You should have told me the first night." "You would have run." She stood in the warm stable with the horses moving and the lamp steady. "Yes," she said. "I know." She said, "Where is he?" Jonah looked at her for a moment. Then he named a valley 2 days' ride northeast. She went back to the station and got the survey and came back. They worked through the legal language together at the corner table until near dawn, the lamp between them, neither speaking much beyond what was necessary. She identified the authorship clause. Jonah knew the registrar's schedule, the route the relay stations the faster road. By the time the lamp was burning low, they had mapped the path twice. She had been carrying the survey long enough that she had stopped seeing it as a document. Looking at it now on the table, she saw it as what it actually was, a legal instrument with a specific vulnerability and a specific defense. And she was the defense. She said, "If the notation marks can be verified by someone who knew his system." 2 people, Jonah said. "You and me. The registrar will want a judge to validate competing authorship claims. The registrar can accept the filing under the authorship clause without a judge. The judge comes later if Vane contests." "He'll contest." "Yes." He looked at the survey. "But contesting a registered filing is a different fight from blocking an unregistered one. One of those fights he's already equipped for." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Near dawn, she found the notation marks in the survey's upper right margin. The authorship chain, her father, had built into every section at intervals of about 2 inches. She showed Jonah. He said, "He told me about those." "He taught you the system, the basic key, enough to recognize it, not enough to read it." She translated it quietly, her father's name encoded running the full length of the document. A chain of authorship that no forged survey could replicate without knowing the key. She had the key. So did Jonah, nobody else. Then she said, "If I hand you the survey and you decide to disappear with it, the filing window closes and the land is gone permanently." He looked at her. "I know," she said. "I'm not saying that's what you're going to do. I'm saying I know that's what I'd be risking." He didn't answer. He looked at the survey. She rolled it back up and tied the waxed cord and set it between them on the table. 6 days. Vane called the community together on a Thursday morning. He had chosen his moment well laundry day, which meant most of Ridgeline was already outside at the long tables in the yard, and the informality of the gathering made it feel natural rather than staged. He came out carrying his document box, and Eliza, watching from the station door, understood he had stopped waiting. He laid out 2 documents: a certified death certificate for Elias Harrow, filed with the Territorial Clerk's Office on March 14th of the previous year, and beneath it, a bill of sale, 7 sections of Northern Territorial land, sold from the Harrow estate to a holding company called Meridian Land Associates, 47 days after the certificate's filing, signed by the estate executor and witnessed and notarized. He stood with his hands at his sides, and his expression arranged into something that lived between sympathy and apology. He said he understood this was painful information. He said he had hoped it would not come to this. He said these things quietly, and meant some of them. What date, Eliza said, was the death certificate filed? Her voice was level. She had not moved. Vane told her. March 14th. She looked at the document from where she stood. She looked at Vane. Then she sat down at the nearest bench and folded her hands on the table and said nothing. Vane produced the 3rd document, a territorial operations record from the Northern Territories Cartographic Association, a list of registered couriers 1877 through 1879. He turned to page 3 and set it face up without comment. About halfway down this page, one name, Jonah Creed. Vane said, "I don't wish to suggest anything improper about Miss Harrow's associations, but I think the community deserves the full picture before any decisions are made." He looked at Jonah standing at the edge of the yard near the stable entrance. "I'm sure there is a reasonable explanation." Yes, the yard was quiet enough that she could hear the wind in the cottonwoods and the paper on the table shifting in it. Holt was reading the death certificate with the careful, expressionless attention of a man who has seen enough official documents to know that official documents can be used for anything. Carl Aldridge was looking at the ground. Thomas was looking at Eliza. She was looking at the death certificate. March 14th. It was precise. That was what made it effective. The operations record did not accuse Jonah. It simply placed him inside the same organization, the same years, the same operational structure. The community's arithmetic, a woman claiming her father's land, advised by a man who formerly worked for the operation that disputed the land. They didn't need to conclude anything. They just needed to feel the shape of it. She picked up the certificate and turned it over and read the filing notation on the back. Clerk's office. Clerk's name. Date of original submission. Certification stamp date. All March 14th. All in order. All exactly what they claimed to be. She set it back down. She looked up at Vane and said, "Thank you, Mr. Vane." She stood, picked up her satchel, and walked inside. Upstairs, she sat on the bed and took out her father's letter. March 14th. The letter referenced Ruth Holt by her given name. The fence line correction. The north pasture drainage. Things that had not existed in March of the previous year. Things a dead man could only have written about after they happened. She folded the letter back and held it in both hands. A dead man cannot write about future events. A fraudulent death certificate cannot predate the living man's knowledge of current ones. She knew the crack. She couldn't move on it yet. She needed 2 days of public argument, and Jonah on the road with the survey before the confrontation happened. She went downstairs and found Holt at the counter and told him she needed to make a case in the yard on Saturday. He looked at her for a moment, nodded once, went back to his accounts. 5 days remaining. She had the letter. Vane did not know she had the letter. He had prepared for everything else. Vane came to her table that evening. He did not announce himself or request permission. He simply appeared at the chair across from her, settled into it, with the ease of a man who considered himself a welcome guest wherever he sat, and waited for her to look up. "I've taken the liberty," he said, "of sending a messenger to the Territorial Registrar's office this evening. A standard precaution requesting verification of the Harrow estate status before any filing activity is processed, to avoid confusion on both ends." He paused. "These things move at their own pace. I'd expect a response within the week." He stood. He wished her a pleasant evening. He went to bed. She sat with the survey in her hands. If Vane's inquiry arrived before the survey, the filing window would freeze pending estate verification. Weeks, possibly months. The window closed in 5 days. Tonight. Jonah had to leave tonight. She looked at the empty satchel. The survey had been inside it for 11 months before she found it, and somewhere in that chain of missed connections and rerouted mail and relay riders on fast horses, her father had still believed it would reach her. He had built the mechanism and trusted the mechanism and hidden in a valley northeast and waited. She was the last piece of his mechanism. She had not known that until now. She wrote the filing authorization on a clean piece of paper. Her name, the survey's reference number, the authorship clause citation, the statutory grounds for immediate registration, her signature. Read it back twice. Then she took a second piece of paper and wrote something shorter, folded it separately. She looked at that folded paper for a moment before she put it in her pocket. She found him in the stable, already saddling the bay. She put the survey on the corner table and the authorization beside it. Then she set the folded paper on top and kept her hand on it for a beat before she let it go. "Take both papers," she said. "The first is the authorization. The second, open it when the filing is confirmed." He picked them both up. He did not unfold, either. He looked at her. She said, "Can you beat the messenger?" "The fast road." "Yes." She nodded. She turned around and walked back to the station. She did not hear the hoofbeats for a long time. He was still saddling, or he had already decided something. She stood inside the door with her hand on the frame and waited. Then the hoofbeats came south first to reach the fast road, then east, then nothing. She sat down at the table with the empty satchel across her knees, and the lamp burning, and the survey gone, and nothing in her hands. She went upstairs and slept 4 hours and came back down before anyone else, and built the case on paper, working from memory, from the notation, marks she had memorized section by section, from the letter and its anachronistic references against the death certificate's fixed date. She wrote it out twice until it was clear enough for a stranger to follow. She was still writing when Holt came down for the fire. On Saturday morning, she called the community to the long tables in the yard. No document box. She had the death certificate veins, which she had kept, and her father's letter, and she set them both on the table and stood back. "The death certificate for my father was filed on March 14th of last year," she said. She put her finger on the date. "This letter was written by the same man after that date. I can demonstrate this in 3 ways." She did. First, the letter referenced Ruth Holt by her given name. Ruth Holt had not been introduced by first name to any guest of the station since the previous August. Eliza had her name because Holt had used it in a private conversation in November. The letter had it. Second, the letter referenced the slope survey of the north pasture, and the specific drainage concern Holt had raised standing water at the northeast corner in spring, which was not documented anywhere before the previous spring's flooding revealed it. Third, the notation chain in the survey margin. She translated it aloud slowly, section by section. Her father's name encoded in his own private shorthand, pressed into every quadrant, every elevation. Reading, every corrected contour. A chain of authorship running the full length of the document. No forged survey could replicate this without knowing a system shared with 2 people, one of whom was standing here. She stopped and stood back. The yard was quiet. Vane was standing slightly apart from the group, very still. She watched him work through the arithmetic, a careful man, understanding with precision the moment he had miscalculated. He had known about the satchel, the survey, the authorship clause. He had not known about the chain in the margins, because that was her father's private invention, shared with his daughter and one other person, and neither of them had told Aldous Vane. The community was doing its own arithmetic. Thomas Aldridge looked at the 2 documents side by side. The widow Carver looked at Vane with the expression she used when she had almost finished deciding about someone. Holt set the death certificate down and stared at nothing, which meant he was thinking the hardest. She did not fill the silence. She had said what there was to say. The arithmetic either worked or it didn't, and she could not do it for them. Holt walked from the back of the yard to the counter. He opened his filing drawer, 3rd shelf. He took out a folded paper considerably older than everything else on the table, the fold lines soft and worn. He set it beside the death certificate without a word. Vane looked at the warrant for a long moment. He picked up his documents, the death certificate, the bill of sale, the operations record, folded each one carefully back into its proper creases, put them in his document box. He put his hat on. He looked at Eliza, one direct, considered look, not anger, not defeat. The expression of a man who had built a structure with one flaw, and who had just met the person capable of finding it, and who understood now precisely when he had underestimated her. The morning she had asked him the date on the death certificate, and then sat down, and given him nothing. He walked to the station gate and through it and down the freight road south. Nobody called after him. Jonah was not back. She sat down at the long table. The filing window had 4 days left. Vane's messenger was 2 days ahead of Jonah on the road. She did not know which had arrived at the registrar's office first. She did not know if the filing had been flagged. She did not know if she had made a catastrophic mistake 5 nights ago when she set the folded paper on the table and lifted her hand from it. Holt went back to the counter and left his ledger on the outside surface open. The Aldridge brothers went to the stable. Thomas came back with a harness that needed mending and sat on the porch steps. Carl came and sat at the other end with a second harness. They worked without looking at each other, and without not looking at each other either. Widow Carver came out with 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of Eliza. An hour passed. Then 2. The light moved across the yard in the way late afternoon light moves in October, slowly at first, then faster as the angle dropped, the shadows stretching east and flattening and finally disappearing into the general dark. She had surveyed enough ground at enough hours to know this light by feel. The surveyor's habit always know how much light is left. She thought about the authorization she had written. Her name, the survey reference, the authorship clause citation. The statutory grounds for immediate registration. Her signature at the bottom. She had read it back twice, and signed it, and handed it to a man she had not fully forgiven in the dark, while the station slept. The second paper was the part she kept coming back to. She had written it Saturday morning, in the hour before the station woke the deed, the legal description, her signature the blank line. She had written it because the trust decision and the deed were the same decision, and making one without the other would be incomplete. If she trusted him with the survey, she trusted him with the land. If she trusted him with the land, she wrote it down. The blank line was for her father's signature. She was telling herself now why she had left it blank. Ruth Holt came out and set a shawl on the bench beside her, without saying anything. The cook brought bread. Thomas Aldridge finished one harness and started on a second. The Widow Carver's coffee went cold, and she kept it in her hands anyway. This was what a community looked like when it had decided something. Not loudly. Not with any ceremony. Just present, staying. She had come to Ridgeline Station with a broken shoulder strap and a dead man's instruments, and a name in a logbook that wasn't supposed to be there. She had fixed a fence line and done a drainage survey and held her ground against a polite and patient man with a document box. She had not expected anyone to stay on a darkening porch because of any of it. She kept watching the gate. She heard the horse before she saw it. Fast approach, then slowing. Road east. She was on her feet before she'd registered standing. Jonah came through the gate at a walk the bay dark with sweat along the neck and shoulders. He tied off at the post and reached into his coat as he came to the table. He set a paper in front of her. The territorial registrar's seal, a filing receipt, the survey reference number in the top margin, the Harrow name below it, and a date stamp, Saturday morning, 7:42 a.m. She read it twice. Then she looked up. He said the deputy was early. But Vane's inquiry had arrived at 3 in the afternoon, 7 hours later. By then, the Harrow survey had been registered for 7 hours and 12 minutes, and there was nothing to flag. She put her hands flat on the table. The receipt was there. The seal was there. Her father's survey reference, in the top margin, permanent and formal, the kind of thing that required a court order and a willing judge to undo. She reached into the empty satchel, the compass, the pens, the transit in its cloth, the bent nail lock tool she had never returned, and took out the folded paper she had not given him 6 nights ago. Written Saturday morning before the station was awake. Held back because she needed to be certain she was choosing with her eyes open. She put it on the table. He picked it up, unfolded it, read it. It was a deed. A parcel on the eastern edge of the Harrow land, 12 acres along the creek tributary she had identified. In the third section of the survey, good water, good grade. Signed by herself. A line left blank. He read it twice. He set it flat on the table and looked at it for a long while. Then he folded it along its original lines and put it in his inside coat pocket. He sat down at the far end of the table. She was still watching the gate. The second hoofbeats came slower. North Road. She had not told anyone to expect him, and she had not told them either. The gate opened. He was thinner than she remembered. The brown coat hung differently. the shoulders not filling it the way they had. He moved with the careful economy of a man whose body had been negotiating new terms for some time. But he had the same way of stopping just inside a threshold to read a space before moving through it. She had learned that habit so completely that she no longer knew it as a habit. Elias Harrow dismounted at the post and walked to the long table. He looked at the receipt. He looked at the empty satchel. He looked at Jonah at the far end of the table, and whatever passed between them in that look, it was not surprise on either side. They had been waiting for this specific moment for 2 years from opposite directions. Then he looked at his daughter. She stood still. He was older than she remembered, in ways that had nothing to do with the coat or the weight. The months had moved through him differently than they had through her. She could see that. There would be time. They were both still here. There was a great deal that would need to be said, and none of it was going anywhere. His hand was near the empty satchel on the table. Her hand found his arm. They stood like that while the station was quiet around them, and the Aldridge brothers were on the porch, and Holt was at his counter, and Widow Carver sat at her end of the table with her hands around a cup gone, cold. Her father reached into his coat and took out a pen. He placed it on the deed in front of Jonah at the blank line. No words. Jonah pushed it back toward him. Her father picked it up and signed his full name, clear and deliberate. The same backward lean, the same downstrokes, the same small hook on the lowercase a that she had pointed out to him when she was 9 years old. Jonah took the deed from the table and put it in his coat. The lamp burned low between them. The receipt was on the table. The satchel was empty beside it. The transit wrapped in its cloth inside, and the compass and the pens and the bent nail lock tool that had opened a door that needed opening. The survey was registered, and the land had a name on it that was the right name, and the creek in the eastern parcel ran wherever it ran, without knowing or caring what the deed in a man's coat pocket said about it. Outside the frontier was dark and unchanged and enormous, the same in every direction for a very long distance, indifferent to all of it, to the filing receipt, to the deed, to the name attached to ground that had existed long before any name was put on it, and would exist long after. The cottonwoods along the water moved in the night wind, the way they always moved. The horses in the stable settled. Nobody moved toward inside. A map doesn't make a place yours. Staying does.